Okay, today's daf, we're still discussing this concept called smicha. We're discussing the concept of smicha. Smicha means you put your two hands on the animal, as you can see in the picture, and uh, and uh, and but you don't say anything. I mean, sometimes you do a vidui, but that's what before you shecht it, you put your hands on the animal. So now, here we go. We're on Sadik Beis Amid Beis towards the bottom. To Kol Karbonis Yachid. The Mishnah said that Kol Karbonis Yachid, any private carbon, Tu'un smicha needs smicha. So if you bring a carbon oiler, you got to do smicha on it. Chutz mibchor umasar pesach. The following three carbonos: firstborn animal that the kohen brings that was gifted to the kohen, umasar. If you give meiser behema, the 10th animal that came out of your pen, that was from the newborn animals, upesach, the carbon pesach. Those three carbonos does not need smicha. Tanarbanan. So the Gemara is now going to go through the source for that. Carbonoi. You see in the Chumash it says, as you can see on the screen, Vimzevach shlamim carbonoi. If your carbon is a shlamim, the Torah tells you v'samach yadi, do smicha. Then the Torah says v'menatzoin carbonoi. If you're bringing a sheep for a shlamim, so v'samach has yadai. And then the Torah tells a third time carbonoi, your carbon, then is carbonoi. If a goat is your carbon, so three times the Chumash says carbonoi, your carbon. So we darshan like this: carbonoi v'laya bechar. A bechar does not need smicha. Sheyachol, but I would have thought v'alaydinu. It's a kal v'chomer from a shlamim. Ma shlamim shein kedusha say merechem tuna smicha, just like a shlamim, which is not born as a holy animal, but that needs smicha. A bechar, the firstborn animal, that's born as a holy animal, ein adin shatan smicha. I would have thought certainly that would need smicha. Talmud carbonoi v'loy habechar. Only your carbon needs and not the bechar. Bechar does not need smicha. Then it says another time carbonoi v'loy masa, not masa behema. Shiyochol, I would have thought v'leidinu. It's a kal v'chomer again. Uma shlamim, just like a shlamim, she'ein mekatchen lifneim ulachreim. The 10th born animal, right? When you let it out of the pen, the 10th born animal is koli. But what happens if you mistakenly called the 9th animal that came out of your pen 10, or you called the 11th one 10? So the Torah tells you that your mistake is your loss. They become holy. So shlamim doesn't have that issue. They don't make holy the animal before or the animal after. And the Torah tells you, Tunin Smicha, that the Shlamim needs Smicha. Maser Behema, Shemekadesh Lefanav La'achrav. The Maser Behema, that not only is the 10th animal holy, but sometimes the 9th animal could be holy and the 11th animal could be holy. If you make a error, Ein Adin Shatoin Smicha. So Maser Behema is a much holier animal, certainly would need Smicha. Talmud Loimer Karbonoi V'loi Maser. Maser Behema does not need Smicha. Then the Torah tells carbonoi, a third time the Torah says your carbon needs smicha, v'loi pasach, not the carbon pasach. Shiyachal, I would have thought, v'loi dinhu, pasach should need smicha. Why? Uma shlamim, a regular shlamim, she'ena ba'amoid v'havei. You don't have an obligation to bring a carbon shlamim. It's a donation. To unin smicha, that needs smicha, pasach, the carbon pasach, shu ba'amoid v'havei, that you have to get up and bring it. Ein adin shaton smicha. So certainly that should need smicha. Talmud loimer carbonoi v'loy pesach. So we have the third carbonoi to teach you that carbon needs a shlamim needs smicha, not a pesach. So we have a source of bechor, maser, pesach. Those three carbonos do not need smicha, because each one of them I would have learned from a kal v'chomer of shlamim that it should need smicha. So the Torah gave you three special limitations, three special words that limit that they don't need smicha. Says the Gemara, what do I need those limitations? I could have made a question for you. The reason why a shlamim needs smicha, shekain tu'unin esachim u'tunufas chazav v'shaik. A shlamim has extra services to it. It needs nesachim, which means it needs the flour and the wine on the mizbeach, and it also needs you have to wave the breast and the thigh. So since it has extra services, so the Torah says that it needs smicha. But Bechor, Maser, Pesach do not have those extra services, so it would not need smicha. So, and again, what do I need the karbonos? I would have never thought that they would need smicha. Only where the Torah says it needs smicha. But if the Torah did not write smicha by Bechor, Maser, Pesach, why should I think it needs smicha that the Torah should have to write an extra miyut? And says the Gemara, Kroi asmachta be'alma. The pasuk is just an asmachta. It's just the way to remember. But really, I would never think that a Bechor, Maser, Pesach needs smicha. So then the question is, Ella, we go to Tzadik Dalet, Tzadik Gimel Amar Aleph. Ella, says the Gemara, Kroi Lamali. Why do I need the psukim of karbonoi? And says the Gemara, I have three miyutim: karbonoi, v'loi karbon chavera. You could do smicha, but without the permission of your friend, you can't do smicha on your friend's animal. Karbonoi, it teaches you v'loi karbon goy. A goy that donates a carbon does not need smicha. Karbonoi, v'labes kol bale carbon l'smicha. A karbonoi includes every owner of a carbon for smicha. If partners bring a carbon, let's say you have 5 partners that donate a shlamim, so that each one of them has to do smicha. That's what it's marba. So 2 of them are mamayit, and karbonoi means it includes all owners of the carbon. If it's your carbon, even though you only own 20% of the carbon, you still have to do smicha on the carbon. Then the Mishnah said, Hayoresh Soimech. If a guy inherited, because his father died, a carbon, right? So then he has to do smicha. And the Mishnah said also that when you inherit a carbon, it's mamish your carbon. And therefore, you can do tmura, which means that if you say you take another animal, and you say this animal should be a tmura or an exchange for this animal. So the Torah tells you that if you try to exchange a carbon, you're punished. Both the original and the one that you exchange become holy as the carbon. That's called tmura. You're not supposed to do that. The Torah tells you don't do that. And if you do that, both are going to be holy. So they're tmura. So the Mishnah says that when you inherit a carbon, you do smicha and you do tmura. Tana Rav Chananya Kamed Rava. So Rav Chananya taught a brisa in front of Rava, which said the opposite of our Mishnah. This brisa says, Rav Chananya brought a brisa and it says, Yorish Einer Samech, Yorish Einer Meimer. Yorish does not do smicha, and an inherited does not do tmura. So Rava questioned the brisa. But our Mishnah says the opposite. Hayorish Samech, maybe as the Sachav Umeimer. Our Mishnah says clearly that a Yorish does smicha and a Yorish can do tmura. So Amalei, so Rav Chananya said to Rava, Ibchoi, should I turn around the brisa? Should I correct the brisa as if it should say Yorish Soimech, Yorish Meimer? Amalei loy. So Rava said, no, the brisa could be true. There is an opinion that says that a Yorish does not do smicha. Masnisa money, our Mishnah goes according to the brisa. Our Mishnah is who's the author of the brisa? Rabbi Yehuda. The author of the brisa, Masnisin here means brisa, is Rabbi Yehuda. The Tanya we learned to the brisa, the Tanakama holds, the Rameir is Yorish Soimech, Yorish Meimer. Rameir, who is the author of a Stam Mishnah, of our Mishnah, holds Yorish will do smicha, a Yorish will do tmura, can do tmura. But Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Yehuda is the author of the brisa, Yorish Eina Soimech, Yorish Eina Meimer. A Yorish, if you inherit a carbon, you don't do smicha. If you inherit it, you cannot do tmura. My time of Rabbi Yehuda. What is the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? Because one of the psukim says karbonoi. If it's your carbon, do smicha. V'loi carbon oviv, not if your father. If your father left you a carbon, you don't do smicha. V'yalev tchilas hegdish mesoif hegdish, and I learn out the tchilas hegdish, which is tmura from smicha. In other words, the smicha is right before you shech the carbon. That happens right before you slaughter it. And here, mas soif hegdish, just like by the end of the hegdish, right before you slaughter it, we have a rule: Yorish ain't a soimech. Yorish does not do smicha. So then I could juxtapose and say af tchilas hegdish. So also at the beginning of the hegdish, right at the start, Yarish ain't a Meimer. Yarish will not do Tamura. So Rabbi Yehuda learns it from Karbanoi that once it doesn't do Smicha, then it's also not going to do Tamura. Rabbanan have it an opposite pasuk. There, the Chumash says Homer Yamer. If you do Tamura, why doesn't the Torah use this double expression? L'Rabba says a Yorish, that a Yorish could do Tamura. Oh, so once a Yorish does Tamura, we're going to say a Yorish can also do Smicha, does Smicha. V'yalav Soif Hagdish Metchilas Hagdish. You want to know about the end of Hagdish, which is Smicha, from Tamura. Matchilas Hagdish, just like the Tchilas Hagdish, the beginning of the Hagdish, Yorish Meimer. Yorish does Tamura, because Homer Yomer tells us that once you make something holy, you could do Tamura, and even a Yorish could do Tamura. Av Soif Hagdish, so also, when it comes to Smicha, Yarish can do Smicha. Says the Gemara, V'Rabbanan, Hai Karbanon, my Avdilei. What do the Rabbanan do with the word Karbonai? Karbonai tells you you don't do Smicha, maybe, like Yarish doesn't do Smicha. Answers the Gemara, no. Like we said before, Karbonai v'loy Karban Goy. Karbonai v'loy Karban Chaberoi. Karbonai l'Rabbis kol baral Karban l'Smicha. We have already what to use Karbonai for. A Goy doesn't do Smicha. You can't do Smicha without the permission of your friend, even with the permission of your friend. And it also says Karbanoi that all partners do Smicha. So therefore, all Karbanois are used up. So we don't have a Karbanoi to exclude a Yairish, an inheritor. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, the Rabbi is called Rabbi Yehuda. How does Rabbi Yehuda, does he use the Karbanoi for all these three things? Answers the Gemara, no, because the Rabbi is called by the Gemara says two things. Either you can say the Rabbi is called by the Karban Smicha Leslie. Rabbi Yehuda doesn't hold that every partner has to do Smicha. He holds that only one partner could do Smicha. And because of that, therefore, Karbanoi, he has one Karbanoi extra, and that teaches you a Karbanoi, your carbon, and not the Irish. So it frees up one of the Karbanois. The Inami, even if we want to say Islay, that Rabbi Yehuda used up the Karbanoi to teach you that all partners have to do Smicha. So, but then he frees up another one. Goy v'chaveira mechad kronafki. The Karbanoi v'loy goy, Karbanoi v'loy chaveira, he learns it from one pasuk. It's yatzre le trei kroi. Then you have two psukims. If goy and chaveira learn from one pasuk, then two psukim, then you have two Karbanos left. Chad Karbanoi v'loy Karban Aviv. So one Karbanoi, Rabbi Yehuda says, means your carbon, and not if you inherit a carbon from your father. The idach, and another one, l'Rabbis kol bali Karban l'smicha, that will include all owners of the carbon for smicha. So that's the story with Rabbi Yehuda. That's the story with Rabbi Yehuda, how he deals with the pasuk of Karbanoi, which was limited, which he uses as a limitation, Karbanoi v'loy Karban Aviv. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yehuda, Hi Homer Yamai Avidlei. What does Rabbi Yehuda do with this pasuk of Homer Yamir? In other words, according to the Chachamim, they use Homer to include everything, to include a Yairish to do Tamura. But Rabbi Yehuda holds a Yairish does not do Tamura. So what does he do with this pasuk? He needs it. If a woman brings a carbon and owns a carbon, she could do Tamura. The Tanya, we learned in the Brisa, if he should call Inyan Kula Eina Medabel Zacha, Bilshain Zacha. The whole parsha of Tamura is in the male form. So I would think that it only applies if a male makes a carbon. Then the Torah was strict about the inyan of Tamura, but not if a female owns the carbon. So how did we end up including a woman that she can violate the Isra of Tamura? The Torah uses the double language. So that's how Rabbi Yehuda learns it. Rabbanan, how did the Rabbanan know that a woman can do Tamura? Darshe me've'im. The Torah tells you ve'im, the extra vav, will include a woman into the parsha of Tamura. Rabbi Yehuda ve'im loy darsh, and Rabbi Yehuda does not darshan the ve'im. So just to summarize, again, we have a machlokes in between our Mishnah and the Brisa, and the author of our Mishnah, let's say, is the Rabbanan or Rab Meir, who holds a Yairish does smicha, a Yerush can violate the Isra of Tamura, and Rabbi Yehuda says not so. And each one, Rabbi Yehuda learns it from Karbanoi, not to exclude the carbon of your father, and Rabbanan learn it from Homer Yomer, that to include a Yerush to the inyan of Tamura and smicha. Now the Mishnah discusses the new Mishnah. Hakol samchin. Everybody has to do smicha chutz except cheresh shaita v'kata v'suma v'goy v'evet. A cheresh, a deaf mute, a shaita, someone who's insane, and a katan, somebody under bar mitzvah, a blind person, a goy, a slave, a shliach. If you make a shliach to bring your carbon, a messenger, he does not do smicha. Lo isha, and a woman. Usmicha, says the Mishnah, and this is very important, shiare mitzvah, is like a remnant of the mitzvah. In other words, if you forgot to do smicha, the carbon is still kosher. Where do you do the smicha? Ala roish, on the head, but beis yadayim, use your two hands. Right at the place of the smicha, that's where you do the shchita. So usually it's in the north. But take if l'smicha shchita. Right after you do the smicha, don't have it delay. Right away, do the shchita. So the Gemara says like this: and I understand somebody who's under bar mitzvah or insane. The reason why, even if they inherit a carbon, so they own a carbon, I understand why they don't do smicha. The la b'nei deyaninu, because they don't have the maturity to do smicha. Goy nami, a goy doesn't do smicha. Bnei Yisrael soimchem ben goyim smicha. We have a pasuk Bnei Yisrael does smicha, not a goy. I thought we darshaned it from Karbanai, but we have a pasuk that says a guy doesn't do smicha. Ella suma, a blind person, my tamaloi. Why would he be exempt from doing smicha? Just lead him to the animal and put his hands on it. So Rav Chizda, Rav Yitzchak Bar Adimi, Rav Yitzchak Bar Adimi argued what the source is. Chadama asis smicha sichem ziknei eda. We learned smicha from ziknei eda. The Chumash tells you in Parshas in Vayikra that when it's a par helam dava shel tzibur, as you can see on the screen, v'samchu ziknei eda, the Sanhedrin has to do smicha. Now, in order to be on the Sanhedrin, you could not be blind. You couldn't be handicapped in some way because you have to be able to see the evidence. So we darshan like this, that just like the smicha by the Sanhedrin cannot include a blind person, so any smicha does not include a blind person. And one said the source for a blind person is exempt from smicha, that we exempt smicha from the carbon oilus re'iyah. The Torah tells you that when it comes Yom Tov time, you have to go up to the base of Mikdash to bring a carbon, and the Torah says God sees you with two eyes. So also when you're obligated to bring that carbon, you have to be somebody with two eyes, two healthy eyes, so to speak. So therefore, you're exempt from smicha. Says the Gemara, why didn't he learn from the source of the Sanhedrin, the Par Helam Dava Shatziba? Why did he seek a source from Oilas Re'iyah? Answers the Gemara, we go to Amabez, Don and Yachid mi Yachid, then Don and Yachid mitzibar. The Par Helam Dava Shatzibar maybe is required, excluded a blind person because that is a tzibur carbon. But we'd rather learn from a personal carbon. The personal carbon of Oilas Re'iyah cannot include a blind person. So every smicha doesn't include a blind person. That's a more choicier way to learn that a blind person is exempt from smicha. Says the Gemara, according to the opinion that learned it from the Sanhedrin, the Par Helam Davash Tzibur, why didn't he learn it from Oilas Re'iyah? Answers the Gemara, because it really doesn't say by an Oilas Re'iyah you have to do smicha. Actually, it doesn't. It's implied somewhere else that a carbon oila, an obligation carbon oila needs smicha, because Donna needed by smicha b'kiyufa. I'd rather learn it from Par Helam Davash Tzibur, where it says smicha in the pasuk, where by other places where it says you should do smicha. So by smicha's Par Helam Davash Tzibur, it excludes blind people. So every smicha excludes blind people. La puka oilas re'iyah. The fact that an oilas re'iyah needs smicha, how do you know that? You learn that from a regular donation carbon oila. The Tana Kame, the Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Abba, Yaakov is oila v'yasel kamishpat. Kemishpat oilus nedava limed al oilus chayvesh tu nesmicha. The pasuk says in last week's Sedra that Aaron got close and made his carbon oila, ha-oila. That teaches you that any time an individual has an obligation to bring a carbon oila, let's say on Yontif, he needs to do smicha. So that extra pasuk taught us that oilus re'iyah needs smicha. So since it doesn't say clearly outright that an oilus re'iyah needs smicha, so that's not a good source to learn that a blind person is exempt from smicha. I'd rather learn that a blind person is exempt from smicha, just like we see that the Sanhedrin, when they did smicha, could not include a blind person. So also every smicha cannot include a blind person. Then the Mishnah said, "Va'eved v'shliach v'isha." All these people are exempt from smicha. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught Yodai. It says 3 times in the pasuk Yodai. You see, if it's by Shlomim, it says v'samach es Yodai al Rosh Karbonai. It says it 3 times v'samach es Yodai, and the third time is towards the end. It says v'samach es Yodai 3 times. So what do we darshan? So we darshan. You put your hands Yodai v'la yad shluchai. You can't, if the owner, the master sends with his slave a carbon, the slave doesn't do smicha. Even if you send a messenger, you don't do smicha. Even if you send your wife to bring your carbon, she does not do smicha. Kol hani lameli. Why do I need 3 exemptions? Tzricha. Because of Rachman Echad, if the Torah tell you 1 exemption, havamino, I would thought lebute eved. An eved that brings us the slave, that brings the animal on behalf of the master, the la bar mitzvahs. He's not obligation of mitzvahs. That's why he's exempt from smicha. But if you make a messenger to bar mitzvah who is obligated in mitzvahs, and we have a fact, shluchish laden kamoisei, your messengers, like you're there, I would tell the shliach to do the smicha. So that's why we say, no, a shliach does not do smicha. If it's say by the shliach and the eved, they don't do smicha, the lav kegufi dami. They're not like yourself. Aval ishta, your wife, if you send your wife to bring your carbon, the kegufi dami, a wife is like your own body, ema tismach, I would think she should do smicha. Tzricha, that's why the Torah tells you that even a wife does not do smicha. Smicha shiara mitzvah. How do you know the smicha is not a main part of the mitzvah, but it's just an accessory to the carbon? Torah tells you that if you do smicha, then you get the kapara. Says the Gemara, does the smicha cause the kapara? The sprinkling of the blood of a carbon brings kapara. The dam is important, and only the blood, sprinkling the blood brings about a kapara. So why does the Torah say that smicha is like the sprinkling of the blood? It's teaching you an idea. Really, smicha, you don't have to do smicha. But don't think that you should say, okay, I'm going to skip the whole smicha part. So the Torah tells you, if you just leave it out, the Torah will consider it as if you didn't get a kapara. But the truth is, v'keeper, you did get a kapara. It's a funny thing. The Torah tells you that if you don't do smicha, it's as if you didn't get a kapara, but really you did. But the Torah wants you to take smicha very, very seriously. And the same idea, the same idea by tnufa. If you don't do tnufa, if you don't wave the carbon, you don't wave like by the shlamim, you still get the kapara. The Torah says tnufa lechaper. Does the tnufa, the waving of the carbon, make the kapara? The kapara is with the sprinkling of the badam. So tnufa waving is as an ancillary. It teaches you. If you just skip tnufa, the Torah considers it as if you didn't get a kapara. So the chipa, but you did get a kapara. So Torah wants you to take it very, very seriously, this tnufa business. So that's why the Torah writes it in such a severe form that if you're not going to do tnufa, you're not going to get the kapara, but really you do. So the bottom line is that that smicha is just extra part of the mitzvah, but you do, the carbon is still kosher if you forget to do it. Tana Rabbanim. Torah says yodai, do it on the head, al harosh on the head. V'lo yal tzavar, you don't do it on the neck. Yodai al harosh, v'lo yal gabayim. You don't do it on the back of the animal. Yodai al harosh, put your hands on the head. V'lo yodai al chaza, and not on the breast of the animal. Kol hani lamali. Why do I need 3 psukim to tell you where to do the to do the smicha, tzricha. If the Torah told you one, I would think lemutay tzavar. You can't do smicha on the neck of the animal, because the neck of the animal is not level with the head. Because the neck of the animal, you can't see it in this picture, but it's somehow lower than the back of the animal. So aval gabai, I would think that on the back of the animal, the koi lahade roisha, that's on level with the head, emaloi, I might think that the smicha will be valid over there. Tzricha, that's why the Torah says that smicha is not valid if you do it on the back of the animal. If you say these two, it's not important parts of the body, the neck and the back of the animal. If you do it on the chest, the breast of the animal, that you see, you wave the breast, I might think that the smicha, the leaning would be valid there. Tzricha, that's why you need the pasuk to teach you, you have to do it on the head of the animal. The question is, let's say you do the smicha on the cheek of the animal. What would be the din? Tashma, come in here. The Tanya Abi Biro Rab Lazar ben Yaakov Oimer Yodai al Roishev Yodai al Tzedodim. You have to do the smicha on the head of the animal, but not on the cheek of the animal. Boy, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the question. Matlis mahu shetochitz. What happens if you put a towel on the animal and then you do the smicha? Tashma you can't have a chetzitza, an interruption between you, the animal, the owner of the carbon, and the zevach, the animal itself. Then the Torah tells, then the Mishnah said of shtei yadayim, you have to do two hands. How do I know that you have to put both hands on the carbon? Rish Lakish says, the pasuk says, "V'somach Aaron eshtei yadav." The Torah tells you, last week's in Achrimos, that Aaron puts his two hands. So ksiv yadai, it says you put your hand. Uksiv shtei, and it says two. So yadai is singular. But zeh bin av kol mokum shnema yadai harei kan shnaim. That teaches you wherever the Torah wrote the word hand in the singular form, the Torah means two. The Torah says yodai achas with one hand. Even if the Torah wrote yodai singular hand, it means use your two hands. That's what Rish Lakish told you. So when the Torah will tell you, let's say in Parshas Vayikra, v'somach es yodai, put your hand, the Torah doesn't mean put just one hand on the animal. The Torah means put two hands on the animal. So the Gemara misunderstood that. Amar Rab Lazar, Amar lahashmatza bebeid meshra, v'layama mishmeidu Rav Shlokish. Rab Lazar said over this teaching, and he didn't give credit that Rish Lakish was the author of that teaching. Shama Rish Lakish ve'ikmed. Rish Lakish got upset, and Rab Lazar misquoted Rish Lakish. He said wherever the Torah is going to write yodai, it means one hand. Amalei, it means two hands. If every time the Torah wrote yodai, it means two hands, then why did the Torah write yadav in few places? Why did the Torah write plural? Yadav. Actually, Esrim v'dalid yadav. In 24 places in the Chumash, it says the word yadav. It didn't have to say yadav. If every time it says yodai, it means two hands, the Torah does not have to write yadav. Yadav Taviana, yadav ravlai, shikelis yadav. So ishtik. So the Rab Lazar, who misunderstood Rish Lakish, was quiet. Why didn't you tell me Yodav the Smicha Kamrile? That it's the Yodav of Smicha. Why didn't you answer me back? Wherever it says Yodav in relation to Smicha, wherever it says the word Yodav in relation to Smicha, that's when it means, if it says Yodai, it means two, but not every time in the Chumash it says Yodai, it means normally in the Chumash, wherever it says Yodai, it means one hand. If Yodai means one hand, only by smicha, by leaning, when the Torah tells lean, if it just wrote Yodai, it means two hands. So the Gemara says that's not true. But smicha name ksiv vayisbach es Yodav olabei tzaveu. Moshe Rabbeinu put his two hands Yodav on Yehoshua and commanded him. So there it says Yodav with a Yud. So why did it have to say Yodav with a Yud? It's a smicha. It should say Yodai with, just by saying it in singular terms, it's understood with two. And says Gemara, smicha the behema kamri. It's only by the smicha of the behema. The Torah does not write the word Yodav by when you lean on an animal. It writes Yodai, your hand, but it really means two. One last thing. Ubamakoim shoymchem shoychem tekel smich shchita. My comma. What is the meaning of the Mishnah? Hachi comma. The meaning of the Mishnah is b'makoim shoymchem shoychem. Wherever you're going to do the smicha, do the shchita right away, because to take of l'smicha shchita right after you do the smicha, there's an obligation to do the shchita. You can't have a hefsek of time. You have to do the smicha and then right away do the shchita, and therefore they have to be done in the same place where you're doing the shchita, which is probably the north. Okay, we'll stop over here by the Mishnah on Tzaddik Gimel Amud Beis.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night, everybody.